All right, so at this step, we have our armature all ready to go, ready to have the plaster strips applied to it, and then once we add an outer layer of plaster strips and kind of really smooth everything out to the best of our ability, you can add any details, any 3D details like you can see I did on the face of my banana sculpture here, that puppet. So, if you want to add like eyebrows or whatever, that's what you're gonna do once you do a thin outer layer. So to do this, we will have bowls of water at the table, probably 2 for you guys to share. I will have little strips of plaster gauze already out there for you, and I will have you guys get paper towels, 1 per person. That's just to kind of like clean your hands as you go, and then also a pair of like old scissors. Just because they're old doesn't mean we want to mistreat them, but if you ever need to, for like the detail part, cut one of these plaster strips down a little bit smaller, that's what the scissors will be there for, okay? Okay, so notice that there are all these like little holes in the plaster gauze, right? That's something that once you wet it and apply it, you want to smooth out those little holes, because if you don't, you will really be able to see them in your final sculpture. Like, you could probably still see them a little bit in my banana guy, but that's with me really taking the time to smooth them out. So if you don't take the time to smooth them out, your final sculpture is going to be extremely bumpy and it's not going to be very attractive. So we want to apply these in a thin, even layer around the whole thing, really kind of, again, making it sturdier, okay, and then also adding like a smoother layer around everything. So to work these plaster strips, you literally just dip them in water. They don't need to be dripping. See how like just one drip is coming off every now and then from this plaster strip, but it shouldn't be like sopping wet, okay? But it's all soggy now. And then start anywhere and just kind of like set it down, and kind of similar to the tape, you want to kind of like pull it around and then start smoothing it out. So as you can see, as I smooth it out, I'm getting rid of all those little holes, okay? So I'm taking the plaster from the other areas on the strip, and I'm just kind of like having it fill in all of those little holes. And if you need more water, you can always like dip your finger and just get a tiny bit of water. Your whole sculpture should not be soaking wet from this, right? You're just kind of working in this isolated little area right now. And then you can just continue on. So get another strip, dip it, lay it down. Try not to squeeze your whole sculpture and mess up the form of it as you're doing this, right? You're supposed to be just like applying this outer layer. So you're setting it down and then you're evening it out. You're kind of like, you're smoothing out that piece of plaster gauze. You're like making it one with your sculptures. So see how I got rid of all of those little holes to the best of my ability. Of course, there's going to be some left still, but we shouldn't see as many as you do now, right? When it's dry. So I'm dipping, I'm wrapping, I'm smoothing. So this will probably take a couple classes to get this all on here. A nice, thin, even layer. All right, at this point, I have a thin, even outer layer around the entire sculpture, except for the beak, okay? So that area is kind of small, like in between the 2 parts of the beak. So I'm gonna need to have some strips cut down just like a little bit, like maybe some strips like that. So I'm gonna take a second and do that, cut some thinner strips. And I want you to notice that not only did I get the, like the newspaper isn't completely covered with a thin, even layer, and I've done my best to try to get rid of all of those like little like bumps inside, all those little holes inside of the gauze. And notice that I even took the plaster gauze down onto the neck, right? Now I left some of it uncovered, but I just kind of took a layer and went right over top of the newspaper, right? So I just have the beak left. So I'm gonna start working on the beak. And I still want that space in between the mouth, the two parts of the beak. So I'm gonna try to keep that. It's a little bit more difficult to get those holes filled in if you can't get your finger in there. So you just have to do the best you can. I'm trying to like use my pinky to get in there, but then it's moving the gauze. So I'm just gonna get it the best I can. And that's just gonna have to be good enough. You can probably still see there's some holes in there. I can't really get every single one of them because my fingers are only so small. So I wrapped it around the beak. This plaster will dry rock hard. So if you don't like it when it's wet, fix it now, because once it's dry, that's it. It's like a cast, right? I'll just have that lower beak left, the lower part of the mouth. All right, so I found one little spot I missed with the plaster. So once you have everything completely covered, you could take a minute and go back over with your finger and like a little bit of water and see if you can fill in any more little holes. Really trying to make that surface as smooth as possible. Of course, there are some bumps still. Mine is very, very bumpy, but you want the bumps to add to your project, not take away from it. So try to fill in any of those little plaster holes. Because again, once it dries like this part is already starting to dry. I can feel it, it's getting really hard. Once it's dry, like that's kind of it. So you want to fill everything in as much as you can, you know, once as it's freshly put on here. Okay, so I have my armature done and also my plaster layer.